Now I know how it feels. Okay. I want to jump right into sharing and reading from Romans chapter 4, verses 20 through 22. It's something that Norm had shared and gone through our own Romans road, so to speak, a couple months ago. It's the context of Abraham. And so Paul says this of Abraham: "Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he had promised. This was accredited to him as righteousness." The subject matter this morning is pitch black, experiencing and embracing the unknown. Because sometimes that's where we are in life. In the middle of circumstances, wondering, why in the world am I here? Why is this happening? What does this have to do with me? Another reason is to talk about embracing and experiencing the unknown is because that's a practical example of faith. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Being confident of what we hope for and convinced of what we do not see." That is faith. Now, I've heard of this thing called blind sight or blight. It's a phenomenon where people who are nearsighted are blind, they have a strong sense of their surroundings even though they cannot see. Their four other senses are strengthened to where even though they do not see the world around them, they can still perceive it and exist in it and thrive in it. Now, according to Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:7, that's where our faith should take us. He says we live by faith, not by sight. And it's doable when there's hope abounding and sun shining, snow melting, the hope of spring. We can take that at face value and say, yeah, I live by the faith that his mercies are new every day. The problem can come, the difficulties come when that living at face value opposed to the faith is when we view everything through our human, naturally sinful, limited, imperfect selves. That snow's in the forecast, oh, there goes my hope for a nice day or whatever. But that's just metaphorically speaking. And this happens when we lean on our own limited understanding rather than leaning on God's limitless understanding. And it keeps us from seeing the forest because we're so fixated on the trees in front of us. We can miss that big picture because we can't see the big picture. But when we live by that faith, we view everything through the lenses of the all-powerful, all-knowing, everywhere at one time, holy, perfect, loving, merciful God. That instead of excessively worrying and stressing excessively over what we can see, we're able to trust in God's plans for our lives. We might not be able to see the entire picture at any given time, but we know and have a relationship with the one who can. I may not know what tomorrow brings, but I know who holds the future. I may not know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And not only that, but he's the one that the Bible talks about how he holds the entire universe in the width of his hand. From his pinky to his thumb is the universe. The expansive, yet to fully be explored universe is in God's hands. And yet, he says that he knows the very number of the hair on our heads. The creator of the cosmos, yet it's he who the psalmist says that our very own sigh is known by God. It says in Psalms that our sighs are not hidden from him. Now think of how big this universe is and think how small we are compared to that, yet we are known by him. Yet before we were woven together in our mother's womb, he knew us, and he called us by name. Living by faith and not by sight enables us to put that trust in the Lord. And regarding this phenomenon of blight, our faith is what gives us spiritual blight. And when I think of spiritual blight, I think of the model student of Abraham. And even when we don't see it, God's working. Even when we don't know how a particular situation is going to pan out, or even how in the world God's going to work all things for our good, our faith gives us a strong sense that God is working and will truly work all things. So, and speaking of Abraham, we start at the beginning of that promise that God spoke to him in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. The Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." That was a big promise. And that was something that Abraham couldn't see at the time. He wasn't even sure how it was all going to take place, because the backdrop of that is he was 75 years old when he got that promise. And it would still be 25 years until the son of that promise was fulfilled. So, in those 25 years, it wasn't like Abraham never got discouraged or impatient, because I'm sure he did. He's human. He's not any different than any of us. Because even after all, the strongest, most secure in their faith and relationship with God, Christian, they're not immune to discouragement or impatience. We're told that when his wife Sarah wasn't able to give him that kid, he agreed to that suggestion to go through the path of the maidservant for the kid. And it was like him and his wife felt they had waited long enough, and, well, I guess maybe this is how it's supposed to pan out. And they said, okay. And as we come back to Romans 4, and we read those verses, but I want to reverse back to verse 18 and get that context of what Paul says. So Romans 4 verse 18 says, "Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. Without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he had promised. This is why it was credited him as righteousness." And the emphasis is verse 21. Being fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he had promised. Now I struggle with this passage a little bit. There's an apparent contradiction, which means it only looks like there's a contradiction based off of how, if Paul says he did not waver in his faith, and it was credited him as righteousness, yet he seemingly took those matters into his own hands through having that child with Sarah's maidservant. I don't understand that, and I don't fully know the interpretation of what it means for Abraham to never have wavered in his faith. But what I do know is, just as the Jewish nation can trace their origin and ancestry back to Abraham through Isaac, the Arabic and Muslim nations have a general lineage that also is traced back to Abraham through Ishmael. So I've not personally taken this time to sort out this apparent contradiction and wrestle with it fully. But in a world and a culture that embraces the concept of there's no absolutes anywhere, I rest in the notion that God's truth is absolute truth. His Spirit-inspired word from the Bible is absolute truth. Therefore, even in moments when I don't fully grasp it or am distracted by apparent contradictions, I can be fully persuaded that God has the power to do what he has promised to do. And as I mentioned, Romans 8:28, and Norm talked about about a month ago or so, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. Separately, one of the promises that I personally hold on to is when I felt the Lord speak to me saying, hey, look at the stars. Can I not provide for you? And how that spoke to his provision in my life. In the face of what's before us, we can lean and rest secure in the hope of Jesus and be persuaded and convinced that without a shadow of doubt, that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose, his promises. I'm reminded of a hymn back in the day where it says in verse 3, what have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I am blessed. I have blessed peace with the Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. And it can be difficult to lean on that and to rest in that, because it gets distracting, life gets blurry. But no matter where we are at, we can be encouraged that we are able to rest in the everlasting arms of God, believing in what he said we cannot see. So I want to switch back to talking about Hebrews 11, as it says again in verse 1 that faith is what is things of hope for, things we cannot see. Hebrews 11 is widely known as the Hall of Faith because of the large list of individuals that had immense faith in God. And I want to spend time talking about that. There are two different categories of faith that it talks about. It's a category of faith that is accomplishing great things, and it's a category of faith of enduring great things. And thinking about how faith enabled people to accomplish great things, Hebrews 11, verse 11, speaks to Abraham and says, by faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah, herself barren, was unable to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And these verses go on for 24 more about men and women who, through their faith, accomplished great things. And I feel these are the things we want and maybe even dream about our faith being seen and utilized with to accomplish great things. Verses 31 through 35 can be summed up like this. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to continue to list in detail what others were unable to accomplish through their faith. There are women that received back their dead and raised to life again. However, there are others whose faith enabled them in another area. And that, again, is in the second part of verse 35. And shifting to this, what faith enables us to do. Finishing out verse 35, it says, others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Faith also enables us to endure great things. At some point in our lives and through our lives, where we are called to experience and endure hard and intense stuff that we wouldn't have chosen for ourselves. This is just as much as an opportunity to demonstrate great faith in God as the glory stories of Group 1. The things we are told Bible stories about and would love to experience. No matter what, we are called to be people of faith. Not just to say it, but to demonstrate it. Faith isn't just about Group 1, but also Group 2. Sometimes God asks us to be a hero in faith by continuing to trust in him when everything says he has forgotten us. He has forsaken me. Sometimes faith looks differently at different times. Sometimes it's the faith that can split the storm, like Moses parted the Red Sea. But sometimes it's the faith to withstand the storm as it rages on. No matter if it's accomplishing great things for God or experiencing things and not giving up or giving in, it's faith. Verse 39 says, "These were all commended for their faith." Because faith is not simply a thought or a belief. It's a demonstration. It's a lifestyle. As followers of Christ, we are called to live by faith and not by sight, even when we don't know where we are going or what present situation has to do and why. Hebrews 11:1, faith is being convinced of the things hoped for, confident of what we can't see. And that's what Hebrews 11 tells us. Faith is not just a theory, it's a demonstration. Faith isn't just what we talk about, it's something that we live out. These two groups of faith we see in Hebrews 11, these demonstrations of faith, our faith being lived out, again, look differently at times. Earlier we talked about having spiritual blight, to embrace where we're at and allow ourselves to be in that moment what God has. And I think about my own life when Emily and I were in between jobs and we were in Fargo, and I spent a lot of time, energy, and stress and money trying to get out of that spot, trying to get to that next job and ministry spot. And it wasn't until I accepted and had peace in knowing that this is where God has me, did I begin to thrive and have a better outlook. And I again think about 2 summers ago when Emily was lined up to be a long-term sub at the elementary school. And then at the 11th hour, the school found someone to take that teaching spot, and it was a bummer. But shortly after that, into the school year, she was asked to take a long-term sub for 2nd grade, which she did, and she loved, and it brought forth life into her, like, this is what I want to do. And now she's teaching kindergarten and is looking towards confidently stepping into that fully, into a teaching career in the years to come. So, in closing, I asked Emily to lead us in Amazing Grace, but I'm drawn particularly to verse 3 and 4. As the beginning words of these 2 verses encapsulate the examples of faith we've talked about in Abraham and Hebrews 11. Verse 3 says, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." Verse 4, "The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures."